The diner smelled of burned coffee and fryer grease, and the fluorescent tube above the corner booth had been flickering for so long that Emery Walsh had stopped seeing it as anything other than a fact about the world. She sat with her left wrist wrapped in a dish towel borrowed from a server who hadn't asked questions, and $11.40 in her jacket pocket, and a borrowed cell phone face down on the Formica table in front of her. Outside the plate glass window, rain came down in sheets. The parking lot held a semi-idling at the curb, a blue pickup near the road, and a silver Buick that had been stationary near the entrance for 37 minutes. She could see the faint orange ember of a cigarette through the driver's side glass. Those men were not waiting for the rain to let up. Emery pressed the heel of her good hand against her forehead and tried to organize what she actually knew. This was the skill she'd built her whole adult life on, sorting facts from noise, running down the ledger line by line until the number that didn't belong announced itself. She was trained for it. She was good at it. The facts. Joel had told her to stay here and not call anyone. He'd said that 41 minutes ago, from the driver's seat of his Honda, right before he'd reached across her lap and popped the passenger door open. She'd climbed out. She'd stumbled on the wet curb. That was when the wrist happened, and by the time she'd found her footing, the car was already moving. She'd watched the taillights dissolve into the rain. No purse, no phone, no wallet. The $11 were from her jacket pocket, folded behind a grocery receipt. Enough for coffee, Donna the server had told her. Joel had said, "Stay put, I'm fixing it." His word for what was happening tonight was it. Emery turned the borrowed phone over in her good hand. She stared at the screen. For 6 years, she had not used this number. She had not saved it anywhere. Not in a contact, not on paper, not in any form that could be lost or found by the wrong person. She'd kept it only in the back of her mind, in the locked-off section she'd spent years not acknowledging, because some things, once recognized, changed the shape of everything around them. Her father had told her that. Her father had also been shot twice in a parking structure in Tampa 6 years ago, so she'd spent a long time calibrating how much weight his advice deserved. She'd landed on a great deal. She dialed. 1 ring. 2, the click of an open line, and then no voice, just the ambient texture of a room. Rain on glass somewhere far away, someone who had picked up and was deliberately saying nothing. Caruso. His name left her like something she'd been holding underwater. 3 full seconds of silence. Then, "Tell me where you are. Tell me if you can walk." His voice was exactly as she remembered it. Low, unhurried, like a man who had decided a long time ago that urgency was something that happened to other people. East side of the city, off Providence Road, a 24-hour diner, Lucky's. She swallowed around the tightness in her throat. "I can walk. My wrist is sprained. I fell getting out of a car." "Did anyone lay hands on you?" Not a question, exactly. "In a parking garage, earlier tonight. 2 men. They grabbed my face and my arm." She forced herself not to look toward the window. "Nothing worse than that. But there's a silver Buick in the parking lot right now with 2 men inside. They've been sitting there for close to 40 minutes. Back exit in the diner." She looked toward the kitchen. Through the pass-through, she could see a gray metal door, propped open an inch with a rubber wedge. Yes. Go to the bathroom, count to 300, then go out the back and wait by the dumpsters. A brief pause. "Don't use that phone again after you hang up." "How far out are you?" 11 minutes. He ended the call. Emery set the phone on the table and looked at it. Then she stood up, left the $11.40 under the coffee mug, walked the dish towel back to the counter, told Donna quietly that she appreciated it, and went to the restroom in the back. She counted, eyes closed under the buzzing light, back against the cold tile wall. She did it slowly and carefully, because she had always been better with numbers than she was with most things, and right now the numbers were the only part of any of this that behaved predictably. At 300, she opened the back door. The rain hit her cold and immediately. The alley smelled of wet cardboard and old grease. She stood with her back against the brick between two dumpsters, watched both ends of the alley, and told herself that this was survivable. She'd been telling herself that on and off for 6 years. She was practiced at it. At 11 minutes, a black SUV turned into the alley without headlights. It stopped and idled. The back door swung open from inside. The passenger door opened and a man stepped out, broad-shouldered, dark suit, with the composed stillness of someone for whom calm was a professional credential rather than a mood. He looked at Emery. He looked at both ends of the alley. He nodded once toward the open door. She got in. Dante Caruso sat on the far side of the back seat. She hadn't seen him in 6 years, and he looked exactly as she would have expected. Older, harder. The same quality of contained intensity she'd associated with him since she was 22, and he was the only person who'd looked her in the eye at her father's funeral and told her the truth about what had happened. He was wearing a grey shirt with the sleeves pushed up, like he'd been in the middle of something when she called. He probably had been. He looked at her wrist, then at the bruise forming along her cheekbone. Something moved briefly behind his eyes, rapid, cold cataloguing, and then it was gone. "The men in the Buick," he said. "They were watching the parking garage earlier. I think they followed Joel's car." He didn't answer. His left hand moved to his phone, sent something without looking at the screen, put it away. He poured 2 inches of bourbon from the console decanter and held it out to her. She took it with her right hand. Outside, in the direction of the diner parking lot, she heard a car door, footsteps, then nothing. "Ferrer's operation," Caruso said. "A statement, not an explanation." She filed the name away. "What happened tonight?" "What do you know?" "2 men put their hands on me in a parking garage. Joel was there. He said something to them I couldn't hear. Then he drove me 4 miles and told me to get out." She looked at the bourbon. "He told me not to call anyone." "He specifically said, 'Don't call anyone.'" "Yes." Caruso was quiet for a long moment. "We'll talk at the house," he said. She wanted to push. She could see in the set of his shoulders that he'd already closed the conversation. She was exhausted and her wrist was throbbing, and she had no leverage whatsoever in the back of his car, so she let it go. She looked out at the blurred lights of the city through rain-streaked glass. "I'm sorry I called," she said. She didn't fully mean it, but it seemed like the right thing to acknowledge. "I told you to call 6 years ago." He didn't look at her. "Don't apologize for doing what you were supposed to do." The house was 40 minutes outside the city. The gate opened silently as they approached and sealed behind them the moment the rear bumper cleared the threshold. The grounds were dark except for perimeter security lights, throwing long angles across wet lawn. The architecture was concrete, angular, lots of glass. Handsome in the way buildings are handsome when they don't particularly care whether you agree. She had spent 6 years in apartments with thin walls and street noise. She had done that on purpose. She had chosen small, chosen ordinary, chosen the specific protective coloring of a woman who did not want to be found by anything larger than herself. A woman named Dr. Page was waiting in the entry. Grey-streaked hair, a medical bag, the professional neutrality of someone for whom late-night house calls had long since stopped requiring explanation. She looked at Emery's wrist and cheek, asked 3 precise questions in a quiet voice, and led her to a spare room with slate-grey walls and a low bed. The wrist was sprained, not fractured. Dr. Page wrapped it with brisk efficiency, cleaned the abrasion on Emery's palm, documented the bruise along her cheekbone with a small, light and steady hands. Emery sat on the edge of the bed and answered questions and did not look at Caruso, who stood in the doorway the entire time with his arms crossed and his face showing nothing. When the doctor left, he walked to the small dresser and set a glass of water and 2 ibuprofen tablets on the surface. "Try to sleep," he said. "I'll be here in the morning. Tell me what's happening." He paused by the window. "Tomorrow." "Now." She kept her voice level. She was sitting on the edge of a bed in a house she hadn't planned to ever set foot in, with a wrist in gauze and a stranger's handprint bruising her cheek, and she was not going to be managed. Not tonight. "You said we'd talk." So talk." He turned. In the low light from the hall, his face was half in shadow. He sat down in the chair across from her. "Joel Brandt has been in contact with Ferrer's operation for 3 months," he said. "No preamble. They went to him first. They knew who you were, who your father was. And they knew I'd helped you disappear 6 years ago. They decided your existence was useful to them as leverage." He said it the way she'd say, "Accounts payable is outstanding, a fact to be dealt with." They approached Joel. They had documentation of a mortgage fraud scheme he'd been running out of his office for 2 years. They offered him a deal. He provided them with your home address, your office building's access codes, your schedule. Tonight, he told them you'd be working late. The room was very still. "He gave them my address," Emery said. "Your address, your office building's garage code, the time you'd be finishing up." Caruso's jaw shifted. The grab was supposed to happen inside the parking structure. "Quita, when it went wrong, you came out 30 minutes early. There were other people in the lot." Joel panicked. He couldn't watch them take you in public. "So he pulled you into his car to keep you from running, drove you somewhere without your phone, and left you." A pause. It bought him time to get to the airport. Emery stared at the floor. She ran through the architecture of it without meaning to. The way her mind always went immediately to the structure of a thing. 3 months. He'd been feeding them information for 3 months. All those Tuesday dinners and Saturday mornings. The weekend trip to the coast where she'd driven because he'd said he wanted to watch the scenery. He'd known where her office building's emergency exit let out. He'd known she always stayed late on Thursdays. She thought about the mortgage fraud. 18 months ago, Joel had asked her to help him organize his filing system. He'd said he was drowning in paperwork. She'd spent one Sunday afternoon alphabetizing and categorizing his client files. And she remembered thinking that some of the appraisal documentation had seemed slightly elevated, higher than the comparable listings in the same zip codes. But she'd told herself she was reading too much into it. She had not been reading too much into it. "I helped him organize those files," she said. "I know." Caruso's voice was careful. "He used your professional credibility to give the scheme a cleaner presentation. Anyone who reviewed the documents would have assumed a compliance auditor had already looked at them." A pause. "It wasn't your fault. He made sure you didn't see the full picture." She pressed her good hand flat against her thigh. "How long have you known about the fraud?" 4 months. My man inside the City Credit Bureau flagged an unusual appraisal pattern tied to Joel's brokerage. I ran a background on him." He held her gaze. "I didn't know about the Ferrer contact until tonight. That came through a separate channel, very late. If I'd known he'd made contact with that operation, I would have moved earlier." Silence. "You've been watching me," Emery said. Peripherally. He didn't soften it. "You made it clear 6 years ago that you wanted the distance, and I gave you the distance. But I was not going to leave you entirely uncovered." He said it like a line item on a balance sheet. "This is what was owed. This is what I paid. Your father worked for me for 11 years. He died in my orbit. What happened to you after that became my debt. I pay what I owe." She hadn't heard her father's name spoken aloud in years. The scrape it made in her chest still surprised her. "I don't need to be someone's debt," she said. "No," he stood. "But you needed a number to call at 2 in the morning when your fiancé left you in the rain, and you had mine." He walked toward the door. "Sleep. I'll be dealing with the rest of it tonight." "What are you going to do to Joel?" He stopped in the doorway. "What needs to be done?" "That's not an answer." She held his gaze. "I'm not going to sit in your house and not know what's happening around me. Not again. I spent 6 years doing that. Tell me exactly what you're going to do." He looked at her for a long moment. The lamp in the hallway caught the edge of his jaw, the line of his shoulder. "Joel took a red-eye reservation under a name that isn't his," Caruso said. "Ferrer's people prepared the documents. He won't make the flight. And when Ferrer's operation finds out exactly who is responsible for tonight's failure, they'll deal with the liability themselves." He met her eyes. "He'll survive it. He won't cause problems." It was more than she'd expected him to say. "Okay," she said. "Get some sleep, Emery." He left the door 2 inches open. She could hear from somewhere deeper in the house the low murmur of activity, footsteps, a phone call conducted in a voice too quiet to make out words. The house was not actually silent. It was just very good at absorbing sound. She lay back and stared at the ceiling. She did not sleep for a long time. By the time the rain thinned to mist and the sky began to grey at the edges, she was sitting in the chair by the window, turning the same problem over and over the way she'd turn a spreadsheet with an unbalanced column. Not with frustration, but with the slow, patient attention that meant she was going to find the error eventually. The problem was this: Ferrer knew she existed. Ferrer knew she was here. Whatever Caruso did to resolve the immediate situation, that fact remained on the ledger. She heard the front gate open, tires on gravel, then quiet. She found Caruso in the study at the end of the east hall, standing behind his desk, still in the same clothes, his sleeves now rolled down and buttoned, a half-empty glass of water at his elbow. He looked at her when she appeared in the doorway, not surprised, not annoyed, just present. "Sit down," he said. She sat. Someone had left a tray with coffee and toast on the side table. She picked up the coffee. "Joel made it as far as the gate at Douglas," Caruso said. "On a name that wasn't his, documents Ferrer's people prepared. He's not on a plane." "Where is he?" "With Ferrer's crew. They've determined he's a liability. His failure last night cost them the operation. He'll answer to them for that." He sat. His hands rested flat on the desk surface. "I didn't kill him. I want to be clear about that." "I believe you," she said. She did, actually. She'd run it through her head last night. What she knew about Caruso's operating style, how her father had described the way the man thought, and she believed him. "What I need to tell you," he said, "is what Ferrer actually wants." He opened a folder on the desk and slid it toward her. She leaned in without touching it. "Your father kept a second ledger," Caruso said, "parallel to the official accounts. 11 years of documentation, cash movements, off-book transactions, arrangements that never appeared in the primary records." He watched her face carefully. "It was his insurance. He never told me it existed while he was alive. I found out after. I assumed it had been lost with him." Emery looked up from the folder. "He gave it to me," she said. Caruso went very still. "Not the ledger itself. A key." She held his gaze. "He pressed it into my hand the morning I left Tampa. He said, 'Put this somewhere safe and don't look at it and don't tell anyone.' I rented a safe deposit box in Asheville and I have never touched it. I don't even know exactly what's in it. I've never opened the box. You have the box number." "I memorized it." He sat back slowly. He looked at her the way he hadn't looked at her since she'd walked in. Not the rapid clinical cataloging, but something slower, like recalibration. "That ledger," he said finally, "documents 11 years of operations. Not just mine, half the port infrastructure on the East Coast, the families who use those docks, the judges who look the other way, the freight operations that don't ask questions. In the wrong hands, it dismantles a significant portion of how this city actually runs." A pause. "Ferrer has been trying to find it for 3 years. He connected you to your father, connected your father to me, and decided you were his best lead." He stood. "He called at 5 this morning. He wants the ledger. He's given me 48 hours. The room was quiet, except for the rain's last few minutes on the glass. Emery looked at the folder. She thought about her father at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, teaching her double-entry bookkeeping when she was 14. "Everything balances," he'd said. "Everything. If your numbers don't add up, it means something's hidden. You find the hidden thing, you find the truth." "I can give him something," she said. Caruso's eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't know exactly what's in that box, but I know my father's record-keeping. He was meticulous and he built in layers." She kept her voice even. "If I can access the box and spend time with the files, I can reconstruct a version that looks exactly like the real ledger. Same formatting, same notation system my father used, same documentation style. but modified, key transactions altered, routing numbers shifted, dates adjusted where it matters. Ferrer gets something that passes surface scrutiny and leads him exactly nowhere useful. She held Caruso's gaze. I audit financial records for a living. I know what documents look like when someone has altered them badly. I know how to do it so it doesn't look altered at all. Silence. Caruso was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face yet. That's not a fast process, he said slowly. No. It would take several days to do it right, longer if the files are complex, which they will be. She didn't break eye contact, which means I'm not going anywhere for the next week, and while I'm here, I want to be in the room. Not briefed afterward, in the room. I want to know what's moving and when. He didn't answer immediately. You understand what being in that room means, he said. In my house. At my table. I understand it better than you think. She thought about her father, 11 years of careful work on behalf of a machine he'd understood completely and trusted incompletely, which was the right way to understand it and the wrong way to survive it. My father spent over a decade in rooms like this one. He was careful, and he was good, and he kept his mouth shut, and in the end, none of that saved him. The only thing that survived was a key he pressed into my hand on a sidewalk outside a hospital. She looked at Caruso. I've spent 6 years pretending I didn't know how any of this worked. I'm done pretending. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. Get the car, he said to whoever answered, and tell Basso I need the full team in the main room by 9. He held Emery's eyes over the phone. Ferrer's moving his port operation by end of week. We're moving first. He set the phone down. The box number, he said. She told him. He repeated it once quietly, without writing it down. He came around the desk and stopped just behind her shoulder, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, not touching her. Your father used to tell me, he said, that you were better with numbers than he was. I thought he was just being a father. Emery looked at the folder on the desk. At 11 years of her father's handwriting, she hadn't seen yet. He wasn't, she said. Caruso made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite anything else. Then he walked out, pulling the door open as he went. The main room held a long table covered in port schematics and shipping manifests, and 5 men with scarred hands in good suits who all looked at her when she walked in behind Caruso. Basso stood at the right side of the table. He looked at her the way he'd looked at the alley last night, assessing neutral, and then he looked at Caruso. She stays, Caruso said, nothing else. No one argued. Emery sat at the near end of the table. Someone had left a legal pad and 2 pens in front of the chair. She pulled the nearest manifest toward her, routing codes in the margins, timing notations overlaid on the schematic, financial designations that were meant to look like standard freight documentation and didn't quite succeed. She found the inconsistency in 40 seconds. She picked up the pen and circled it. Caruso leaned over her shoulder, close enough to read, not touching her. She showed him the numbers, the secondary terminal code that appeared 3 times in the manifest but corresponded to a routing designation that should only appear once per shipment cycle. The kind of detail you'd miss if you were reading for content rather than structure. The kind of thing that looked like a clerical error and meant something else entirely. Caruso straightened. He looked at Basso. The 3rd shipment is a decoy, he said. Real operation moves through the secondary terminal. He looked back at the manifest. She found it. The room adjusted around her. Someone was already on a phone. Basso was pulling up a secondary map. Emery turned to the next page. The morning light came in pale and flat through the high windows, and somewhere beyond the gate, the city was waking up to what it believed was an ordinary day. She didn't have the luxury of that particular illusion anymore. She wasn't sure she ever really had. She'd just been very skilled at borrowing it. She kept working. She didn't look up when Caruso's phone buzzed and Basso said Ferrer's name in a low voice, and 2 of the men left the room at a pace that meant something was already in motion. She didn't look up when Caruso came and stood at her shoulder again, studying the margin notes she'd made in the last 20 minutes. "Your father used the same shorthand," he said quietly, looking at her notation. "I know. She didn't look up from the page. He taught it to me." Caruso stood there for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then he moved back to the head of the table and picked up his own phone, and the room went back to its low, purposeful hum, and Emery Walsh sat at one end of a table covered in evidence of a war she'd spent 6 years trying to outrun, and worked through the manifests column by column, finding every number that didn't belong. There were more of them than Ferrer's people had intended. She circled everyone,